My name is Leah Giselle Field, and it is my pleasure to be here speaking with Sarah Jane Pelzer, who is the director of our wonderful performance, Amahl and the Night Visitors. And it feels a little funny to be speaking so formally because Sarah and I have had the opportunity to become not just colleagues, but friends. We were participants in the Yolanda M. Ferris Young Artists Program several seasons ago. So it's a pleasure to get to see your art sort of come full circle from the training program to a professional production here at the same company.
Thank you.
So you also have an interesting history with this opera.
Mm-hmm.
How many productions of this have you been involved with now?
Just two.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just two. Well, no, that's not true. Three. I was in one once.
Oh, really?
Ages ago in the chorus. And then actually this was the last thing I worked on before the pandemic happened.
Right.
Yeah. So that was a year ago in September in Kelowna with Opera Kelowna. And Alexandra Babel brought us down there, and it was actually myself, Sergio, who's playing Caspar, Stephanie Trichu, who's playing the mother, and Andreas and Les. We're all working there together.
So you basically got the band back together for this production.
Yeah.
So obviously things are different when you're developing a concept for different companies and things like that, and you have different resources at your disposal. But if you had like a top 5 list of fundamental differences between conceiving of your vision for the show last time versus this time, that's probably an impossible question, but go for it.
Well, no, it's not an impossible question. It's just, I think something people don't realize is sometimes you get to do a show and the focus can really be on, really developing something with the artists and having an idea and working with the designer and making it into this world that you really have spent a lot of time creating and then figuring out how to live in that world together. And sometimes by virtue of resources, by virtue of, just availability, you end up working on it in this extremely condensed period of time. So the last time I did this production, I staged it in 3 days.
Oh!
So it was quite quick, 3, maybe 4 days. So this is quite different.
Right.
Yeah. But this time I really got a chance to spend some time with everybody, getting to know them as artists too. Because when you're working on something that's so quick, you really only get a sense of like, well, okay, this person is clearly very competent, has beautiful voice, and that's kind of all you get because you just have to tell them stand here, stand here, stand here. And you can talk a little bit in between, but it's really just pedal to the metal. Whereas this time, we had at least twice as much time, and so I really got to work with them artistically too, and talk about where we think these characters come from and how they relate to each other, and just all the normal stuff.
So in that regard, do you see this production as, I guess, a bit of an evolution of the previous one, or do you see them as two really distinct projects?
They're really distinct in that just this time I got to work with Patrick Rizzotti, who's an incredible designer, really, really smart. We got along like gangbusters, and we were able to, spend the back and forth time with each other, figuring out how we saw the world, and that just is a different kind of springboard. However, I feel like any time you do anything twice, you're building off of a previous thing.
Of course.
Even if it's just, I didn't realize that little piece of information was there when I was just, sitting at home, listening to it, reading it by myself, singing it, whatever. So there's also the fact, too, that I got to work with some of the same performers, and so, of course, they're bringing a whole different layer.
So I guess you saw an evolution in their performances as well.
Absolutely. Well, because for them, first of all, they're not the people who have done it before and fairly recently. They're not having to worry about memorizing it all over again from scratch. So your brain is in a completely different place, although they had other things to focus on this time. But yeah, obviously just things go a step up for them as well in terms of being able to focus on the more minute details and also the bigger picture. I feel like when you're learning something for the first time and working on it for the first time, it's really hard to zoom out and think of something as a character as opposed to little bits of blocking and notes that you have to get right. So
it is fascinating to have the opportunity to experience a show more than once. In my case, when that's happened, I've usually had different roles to learn. So it's been a bit of a mind bender that way. But having the chance to go back to something really gives you a deeper appreciation of just when you're dealing with something that is masterful, that real combination of the text and the music and how there's information in there that you mightn't have gleaned in the first place. So a piece like this is interesting for several reasons. The premiere, if I'm correct, the original broadcast premiere was in 1951. And what we often find in pieces from 50, 60, 70 years ago is that there are some textual or cultural elements that need to be addressed in the light of the current social climate. Did you have any issues with the libretto or things like that with this show?
We did. We had a few. Menotti wrote this libretto, and he wrote the libretto for all of his operas, and he was incredibly prolific and really clever and just like a very charming artist of a man, but also a product of his time. And I think there's also something very specific that goes on with this piece in particular, where it was sort of written for TV and written for children, and so it reminds me a little bit of the books I would see on the bookshelf at my family cabin that was built in the 60s. So you're flipping through and you're kind of like, oh, that I wouldn't say that anymore. So we made a couple updates, but also just contextually, for me, first not being a religious person, that for me just takes I have to. In order for me to be able to authentically direct the story, I sort of have to take a different tack on it, just because I don't have that kind of built-in imagery.
Certainly.
Figuring out what the essential human messages are. And so as far as updating the context also, you're looking at sort of a version of the Middle East that very much, to me, feels like it comes out of a picture book and isn't obviously
I think
very
that's
authentic.
Probably fair.
So what we did, though, what I did to try and get at what I think actually the central message of the story is, which is about relationships and community and hope and connection, was to just really try and think of these people as being, thinking about poverty, thinking about people being taken out of their comfort zone by unexpected events and unexpected people. And using the kings as kind of a metaphor for people who surprise you and bring you a little bit out of your head where you've been stuck with your problems for a long time.
I can only imagine from a director's perspective that working in some of our social distancing and spacing and masking and hygiene protocols was a bit of a mind bender. Can you tell me a little bit about how that impacted your approach to directing the piece?
I don't think people realize how much work you do ahead of time as a director to make sure that you understand how the picture is going to work and how people are going to get from point A to point B. As an opera director in particular, maybe more so than a theater director, where actors are very accustomed to showing up and really building the piece atom by atom, singers have been trained, and also just by virtue of what they're being asked to do athletically with their voices, it's a little bit more structured. So I'm not saying that I decide exactly what's going to happen ahead of time, but I do generally have a bit of a roadmap.
Of course.
But in order to have any kind of a roadmap to plan this, you would have had to sit at home with, I don't know, like a 3D drafting software that could show you the scale of everything and help you like make a movie of what was going to happen ahead of time. So it was really virtually impossible to plan anything ahead before actually having the people in the room, which can be a really vulnerable place for a director to be in, because you're kind of making everything up on the spot. But everybody was really just very grateful to be there and very patient and professional and really good at their jobs. So for me, it was difficult because it felt like I was making people wait around while I sort of stood there and sweated and scratched my head a lot of the time. But as long as we had the ideas there, as long as I was really familiar with the story and the world we were living in, and we were all really familiar with the protocols and you know, kept our wits about us, it just was slower, but still not as far away from a regular opera rehearsal as it could have been.
Yeah. Well, as someone who was in the hall for the entire rehearsal process, I can tell you that it didn't feel like things were taking a million years to put together.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was fascinating to watch the process without being a performer, because that's obviously the perspective that I'm used to in that sort of situation. And one of the things that that we had in the rehearsal hall was a grid taped out on the floor, so that we knew how far apart people needed to be. And it sort of looked to me a little bit like a game of wizard chess.
It felt like a game of wizard chess. That's exactly what it felt like. It did feel like chess. And the metaphor I was using a lot was to do with computer language, just because we really realized that, okay, if somebody moves and the other person has to move over here, you have to have a sequence of events that everybody follows extremely precisely, from the second they move to the order they move in to exactly where they're moving on the floor. So it felt a bit like running computer code. And I only say that because my husband's an engineer, and so I hear that all day long. But that was the metaphor that made the most sense.
I'd never thought of it that way, but I can totally see that. Yeah, it was fascinating to see the process unfold, and then bit by bit, when we took the grid away on the floor and just made sure that people knew where they were in time and space, and then moved to the actual set, to see it evolve and not look like choppy square by square movement was a fascinating process to watch.
And I had no idea that was the very scary thing about directing this piece, was that I genuinely had no idea if it was going to work or not. But everyone was so resilient, and actually it really called to the forefront the craft too. Like, even in the first day, we had them cut big 3.3 meter sticks of wood, and we literally just spent the first day sort of like feeling how far away we were from each other in space, holding on to the sticks. And that's the kind of craft that goes on behind the scenes that the general public never gets to see or hear about. But even just spending that hour with people walking around holding ends of sticks, you get used to the psychic distance that you are away from people. And that helps you build that naturally into how you're really reacting to people, even though they're an unnatural distance away.
When you're doing an opera, you also have to worry about the practicalities of singers having contact with the conductor.
Yes.
So can you talk about how that is achieved in this kind of setting?
Well, first of all, Les is a very gracious musical partner. So there definitely were some times where I was very much stretching the limit of what works in that situation, as you do, because your job is to kind of push and find new ideas, or at least that's how I see my role. But it also is really important for me to help make it work for everybody. So there are significant portions of the singing action where actors are completely blocked from the conductor and can't see him directly at all, because they're walking behind an enormous structure, or they're faced in a different direction. So in some part, we get around those complications just by having monitors in the hall. So there's a camera facing Les, and it shows him conducting, so that we can place a TV screen somewhere where the singers can see it, even if they're facing away. And that, for me, I think that's actually probably one of the biggest innovations in getting away from a more standard park and bark approach, because it allows actors to follow their idea to a different part of the room without having to artificially sort of peek over their shoulder every second. Although most singers that's a part of their professionalism and craft, is to be able to find ways to naturally check in with the conductor, even if you're not facing that way.
I have to say, as a singer, one of the things that I appreciate most about the proliferation of monitors, offstage monitors, is that it makes singing offstage less terrifying. Because very rarely is an offstage sing completely a cappella. However, that is the case in at least part of the choral music in this show.
Yeah.
So where was our chorus?
So the chorus in the Chan Center where we filmed, there is actually a beautiful choir loft that goes all the way up above the stage. There are 2 boxes on the side, so they can be off to the side. There's also a huge space where they can be up top. Now, we had some kind of some finagling to do, but we had some flexibility because, of course, when if you're in an audience, you can see the whole stage in your peripheral vision, no matter where I am trying to focus your attention. But on camera, if we need to sneak the chorus up over to that side of the choir loft above the stage, but we don't want to see them, we can just point the camera this way. And so the chorus in this case was just across from Les and up above the stage.
That's fascinating that you've found ways of opening up new freedoms within the notable restrictions of the current situation for staging art.
But that's the thing about art and artists, and nothing has brought it home to me more than working on this show, honestly, for everybody, is that every single restriction that we had became a contributor to the artistic product. Because it has to be. And for me, anyway, I was like, why are we bothering to do this if what we're doing can't reflect our times? And yes, a lot of that time that has to do with writing a new work. A lot of that time it has to do with, having a greater reflection of our actual world in our stories and our casting. In fact, those are primarily important things that we can do to help our world be shown in our art. But at the same time, just living through our circumstances and finding a way to make our circumstances into art and have them improve the work we're doing and have them contribute materially to the work we're doing, that is living our art. Like that's how we grow. That's why we do it. I think it's just a tribute to what we do for a living and what we love and just to the artistry of everybody, that nobody ever let it get them down.
Right. One of the things that I came to appreciate so much about the experience that I had with the show is that not performing still enabled performance. And anything that we can do these days that allows art to be made and presented and to let it live, I feel is so important.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, I mean, personally, I want to thank you for everything that you contributed to that experience for not just me, but, everybody involved. I think you've put together a visually stunning and a totally beautiful show.
Well, thank you. It's an old saying, but it truly, literally could not have happened without every single person in the room. And I was very glad to have you there, friend.
Well, congratulations on making such a beautiful piece of art.
Thank you.